Hitting the live button. Hello,
It's
everyone, and
alive.
welcome.
Alive. Yes.
Right? Welcome. It's Thursday. And of course,
We're here.
we have a show, right? We're here.
We have to have a show.
So, Brian here, and of course, I'm joined with my co host, Daniel.
Yes, author Daniel Payton. If you notice, I have a whole new background here. I decided to move myself to a different place, so I have different stuff behind me. This right here is my, and you can't even see it all. This is my extensive Hallmark Star Trek ornament collection. And this is literally only part of it because there's still pieces that are in boxes because I just didn't have room. And so I was like, well, we'll have it. But if you notice right here is a beautiful tree topper for the Enterprise that somebody gave me for Christmas spectacularly a few years ago. So yeah, it's from Brian. So that's how it's my and every year I get him every year. So anyways, yes, we are here. Tonight we have another author on. Hello, Valerie and Amber. Glad to see you on here. We have another author on tonight, actually an author who has published a book through the publishing house that's going to publish my book, Owl-Headed Blonde. So we have somebody else who's that publisher, Prince of Cats Literary Productions. So it's Nelson will be on here in a little bit. But it's 1 week. 1 week is Thanksgiving. Wasn't yesterday Halloween? I mean, come on. 1 week is Thanksgiving. Are you ready? Are you doing anything for Thanksgiving, Brian?
I'm working.
Oh, yeah, I guess you would be.
Yeah, I'm the only one. I gave everyone the day off.
That's nice of you.
Yeah, it's just me. So,
I wish you were around here. I'm doing a Thanksgiving drop-in. All of my family is so far away, and most of my family, because I don't have a really big family. I don't have I know people who have 6 cousins in one family, and there's 2 more cousins. No. I have a pretty small extended family, and they're aging, so it's harder for them to travel. So we're so far away that it's just my immediate family here in Michigan. And so we decided we're going to throw an open door Thanksgiving, and we're inviting people who are like us, because being here in Southeast Michigan, there's a lot of people who work like the car industry and school stuff around here, but their families in Arizona and California or in Mexico. And so we're like, well, if you want to come over here for Thanksgiving, have more of a family style time, we're opening our doors, and I'm making a lot of food. And so we're going to have a wonderful drop-in Thanksgiving with games. We're going to have board games out, Jackbox running, whatever. And so I'm having fun. It's going to be a lot of work, but I'll still have fun.
So that means that I can hop on a plane and just walk right in and be like, I'm here for a plate of Mama's food.
It'd be my food. I'm the cook here. You're going to get some fantastic food. Thanksgiving food because I'm doing it.
I'm here for Daniel's food.
If you show up, we'll definitely feed you. We're going to have food and we'll have fun. I got some other good news. Last weekend, I was supposed to be at Indianapolis Comic-Con, and that fell through. However, there is a very small Comic-Con here in Port Huron, Michigan, which is just an hour north of me, and I'm going to be going to that tomorrow, Saturday. It's a one-day event. I say small. It's small in its own size, but from what I've seen, it's a very well-attended Comic-Con. It's very popular where it is. And so I knew about it, but they were full. Well, I lost my place in Indianapolis because my book order screwed me over. Well, I got a call on Monday. It was Monday from them saying, "Hey, we have an opening. Would you like a place?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have all these books sitting here." And so I'm going to be in Port Huron, Michigan, at the Fantasticon. And if you are in around the area, come on over. I'm going to have plenty of books. Looks like it's going to be a pretty good little event. So one day only, just Saturday. And that will be my official last book event until next year. I'm not doing any rest this month or December, probably not January, but I will be scheduling myself a hefty schedule for next year. And I hope to see people there, people who watch the show. Brian will come to one of these. I just know it. Brian will come to one of these. He's got to. So, and other good news, this week we have, I can't show you can't. But the book cover for Earth's Last Starship 2
Oh,
is almost finished. There's a
really?
few tweaks on the coloring that they did for it. We had to work really hard on this. If you've seen Earth's Last Starship, the book cover was designed by and painted by an artist, Pogman, who was at the time an artist for Nickelodeon Studios. He did artwork for Tiny, for Iron Giant, and he did this book cover. Well, he couldn't do the second book cover because he's busy. And he was so nice to the first one, but I, couldn't get in the second. But we got another artist who did as best he could to simulate the style and did a new cover for the second book. And I got to see it. It is great. I love it. So very soon here, I will be debuting the book cover on my pages and stuff. And I'm sure Brian will be happy to show it off because Captain Shepard is right in the center of it. Now, again, it's not going to look exactly like the Brian we know and love, but it's his character. It's Brian's character. So,
I'll take it. Take it. I'm not going to complain. I think I look good. I was portrayed very well on the last cover. I think everyone will agree who read the book.
Well, he's front and center on this one as well.
Yeah. So just remind people just a little bit of the first one. And is it still available? I think people would maybe like to know about Earth's Last Starship.
Oh, Earth's Last Starship? Well, Earth's Last Starship, to tell you about it a little bit, I don't have take up the show on this, but Earth's Last Starship is a story of a starship from Earth that was part of a fleet that was defending the planet. The fleet was destroyed except for one ship. Earth had to protect itself under a barrier, a force field that surrounds the planet, so that the enemy doesn't finish what they started and destroy the planet. Well, Earth's Last Starship, the USS Orlando, under Captain Brian Shepard, is out there trying to find the answer to stop Tolkon, the fleet that's there trying to destroy the Earth. And the story hinges around 10 years after that battle, what the Orlando is doing to finally find the answer to save the Earth. So that's in the first book is the complete story. I wrote it as a standalone because I didn't expect to write more. I didn't expect people to love it so much. I thought it would just be fun. My little homage to Star Trek. It's definitely a Star Trek-esque story, but it went over well, and my publisher loves it so much. He's asking me for a sequel. Somebody here keeps asking for a sequel. So I wrote a sequel, and it's coming out very soon because we are on the very final stages of production. So that's it. And yes, it's out as ebook, audiobook, and print. So if you want to find Earth's Last Starship 1 and re-up before you get to the second one, do so. It's out there.
There you go. That's fantastic news. I myself have moved on from my usual writings to a different genre for once, which is kind of different for me. I'm now dabbling in fantasy.
That's one of my favorite areas to write in.
I'm writing. So technically, I'm writing a Warlock series. So technically, my character is a Warlock, and I'm trying to piece everything together. It's going very well. A lot of research, a lot of looking things up, and all that good stuff. But it's going well so far. So yeah, it's interesting with vampires and witches and other like shifters and stuff like that. So because I'm normally writing just like romance with a little bit of like action or throwing something else in there, but it's usually just romance. So to be in fantasy, there's so many directions to go with that. So I'm having fun. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have listeners that watch the show as well, right? I need like a all these people who have these podcasts who do the serialized writing, and their followers, they all have like a nickname. Why didn't we ever have a nickname for our followers?
We need to develop that. We need to find something to be our cult following word here.
Right.
So, yep, definitely. Are you doing this writing as part of Nano? Are you doing a Nano this month? National
I
Novel Writing
am
Month?
I am not ready to do that. No, absolutely not. That's all you. Um, Not yet. No, I'd like to do something like that at some point. That would be nice. But I'm just having fun dabbling, writing little episodes here and there, getting them out there. People seem to be enjoying them. My downloads are going up. People are listening to, Joshua of Egypt. So we
Yeah,
need more of that when
I need to get
Dan
that
has
recorded.
time. So yeah, I'm just having fun. That's all. We'll have more
So,
fun when Nelson comes on. I know that,
yep,
right?
we're going to
Yeah,
get that very soon here.
just waiting,
Uh,
waiting in the shadows to come on.
yeah, I'll say this though: we need to tell everybody that this may be our last show for the year.
Yeah.
We might
Well,
might do a little something special at the Christmas time, but I think our normal.
everyone, things have changed. Like, the Christmas show was something to watch. Everybody wanted to tune in for the Christmas show because Brian was going to be somewhere as magical and special, and it was guaranteed every year, and I would show people where I am. But I'm not gonna, I'm not going to be there. So, but yeah, there will be a Christmas show. I have something up my sleeve for that Christmas show. As a matter of fact, something big, something very, very big. Um,
Ooh, I'm
yeah,
interested.
I know. I'm going all out. I don't know. No, I'm not giving away cars. This is not Oprah or anything, but no, I still
You
have
ruined my,
something big
my
up my.
hope. You dashed my hopes there.
Well, this is going to be major. It's going to be big. Now people are probably sitting at home going,
He
"What
has
is he
me
talking
confused,
about?"
people. He hasn't told me anything
I
yet
have to
either.
find out. But I'm not
So,
going to tell a soul. Isn't that funny? I'm not telling anyone but Dan. I'll tell Dan, but I'm not telling anybody else. But anyways,
and that is
um, yeah. So for Christmas show, yeah, you never know, but we are going to have one. But right now, yes, Nelson technically is the last guest of the year until we return. Yes, we will be returning in
yes,
January.
and I do
So
have some guests I'm working on lining up that should be fun for next year.
absolutely.
So,
So yeah.
but for now, let's bring on Nelson, the author of The Tea Trader. Hello,
How are you doing?
Nelson. Glad to have you on here. And we have a nice big build up there. You're the big finish for our normal season. So
That's right.
The
nice.
season finale.
Yes. So
That's right.
as I'll have to
Yes.
tell everybody, introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Sure. My name is Nelson McKeeby. I'm Iowa born and raised. I started off in television. I was thrown out of high school when I was 16 and got a job as a television director when I was 17, working for the Home Shopping Network when it was local, when it was not a national television. And basically, I got the job because I could read the manual faster than other people. And I went from being a local television director with a whole bunch of people of 40 somethings working for me to being a national television director with dozens and dozens of 40 somethings working for me and being not able to drink and everybody else could. And then I left it and went freelance, left the Home Shopping Network and went freelance. And I did a lot of hitchhiking back then. I mean, that was my hobby back then before I got married, was to hitchhike. And I would basically spend half the year working and half the year hitchhiking. That was sort of my deal with myself because I didn't really like working full time. And then I would, during the process, write a lot of weird books, which I never intended to sell. I'd write them for friends and print them out and bind them. And then when Amazon came around with self-publishing, I would self-publishing them and throw them around. And I would do experimental books. And at one point I was talking to an author. I had an MFA, I taught some college. I taught a lot of writing courses. just for extra money. I do, basically just anything to scam some more money. Teaching writing is basically the ultimate scam for money, because everybody in the classroom wants to be the next $1 million author, and you're teaching them how to do it, but not telling them there is no such thing as the next $1 million author.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine put me into contact with Alexi, who is the head of Rabid Fanboy, and he wanted to read some of my stuff. So I sent it to him, and I said, I got 14 books sitting around. Do you want any of them? He says, yeah, well, 14. I read your basics. I want them all. So we're publishing them as fast as we can. And the first one was Tea Traders, which is a series of 4 books based upon Persian mythology, but set into a fantasy world. I guess that's my story. I mean, I guess that's where I'm very excited about the book. I have a large social media following, about 11,000 people right now. And they've kind of propelled the book. Alexi just called me up and told me that the book on the internal authors, not the front, not what you see in Amazon normally, but in the publishers, skyrocketed to number 1,000 for sales this month, even though it's just been out for a day. Now it'll, of course, we all know what'll happen to it once it quits its first sale. But he said that was actually good for an author who was, on the other hand, I'm not, he said, I'm not really an author coming out of the gate. I've been writing stuff for a long time, just not bothering with traditional publishing, and I'm kind of enjoying it. It's a lot of fun.
Nice. So we know, as I posted, this book today is the release day for this book. So that's congratulations right there on the release of it, which I know personally what kind of work and dedication it is to get to that release point, but it's also getting to that good sales point that first day. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's just the social media. I have a lot of followers who are very, you talked about what they call themselves. They call themselves Nelsonites, and they follow my social media page, and I get what 3 million unique views a month, 10,000 permanently subscribed readers, and it's all because of them. I mean, it's not because I'm a brilliant writer. It's because they think that something's going to be interesting in that book, and they haven't read it yet. And little do they know, when they get it, the used bookstores will suddenly be flooded with my novel. But and no, I'm just kidding. But it's all because of the social media. I love my readers. In social media, and they're the ones that are really pushing the book, because I just had to announce I was doing it, and then all of a sudden they're running around and doing cool things and sending it to each other, and links. Because on my social media, you're not allowed to, on the place where I publish, you're not allowed to sell things. So you can't say, you have to say things like, my book is available in a jungle situation with a large river running by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let us get into this book itself.
Sure.
So tell us about this book.
Well, it's all based upon sort of like I said, the Persian mythology. The main character is, his name is Javier, and he screws up and marries a princess by accident, who's not supposed to marry him. And the princess is a very strong-willed woman and very powerful. But her father is even more strong-willed and powerful, and is going to, essentially, the only thing he wants from his daughter is an heir, but he didn't intend to have an heir from a basically a vagabond playboy. So she essentially steals him a ship, sticks him on it, and says, go away for a cruise, do tea trading, and I'm going to deal with my father for the next year, which is essentially the second book where she deals with her father. But and so the book is basically related. If you think about Sinbad the Sailor, it's a serialized version of the Asian, basically, where you create a main character, Sinbad. In my case, it's Javier, and you have the character moving through, going. This would be a Star Trek reference, because you even said that. Going from island to island and trading for tea is the equivalent of the Enterprise going from planet to planet, and then all the characters on the ship, and the fact that it's a very multicultural ship, and it's the readers, at least the readers that did the test reads, said that it took them a while before they finally twigged on this wasn't Earth, and the islands were not anything they could relate to. And then the characters drop into Arabic all the time, so without any particular explanation, at least not till you have to buy the fourth or fifth book, if there is a fifth one, to find out the reason why they drop into Arabic all the time.
Okay, we were talking about this before, and you said this was. We were saying this was inspired by some Persian fables
Absolutely.
and myths.
Yeah, the Persian. There was a Persian story. Have you ever heard of Scheherazade? Kind of hard to pronounce that right, but Scheherazade is a group of stories. The Persians loved nested stories, and so they created these nesting stories where the storyteller tells stories, and sometimes inside the stories, their people are telling stories. So, and a lot of these myths that came out of this time are these wonderful, plush, sexist, violent stories. And so what I did was I basically kind of picked up the novels in their original language, tried to read them. My reading of Arabic and the ancient Persian is terrible. So I finally got better translations, and because some of the translations are actually, a lot of the translations are what I call Southern Library Bible Belt translations, in that they very much strike the language and make it, you can't really appreciate the like, Persians love dirty jokes, and they're like completely ripped out of the, so I read these stories, and rather than just copy them, because I was thinking about just updating them, I decided that I could do the same thing, just not with the same stories, because it was very hard to get, oh, I'm going to murder you tomorrow, my wife, unless you tell me a new story, or I'm going to, it's real hard to turn that into a modern novel that has any, I'm not writing Game of Thrones. I'm writing something a little more friendly.
Yeah.
And so, it was the idea of the Persian story. And it's a fantasy book, but it's also a science fiction book. It's just, you're not going to realize that for a couple of entries, that there's a science fiction element to it.
Nice. Yeah. I did something similar. I was studying old literature a while back, and I started reading a lot of, because I've read Dickens my whole life. I love Christmas Carol. I read it every Christmas in the original form, but I love classic literature. So I started to go into the adventure literature. That there was a big push to that in late 19th, early 20th century. It was starting, from the Jungle Book to Tarzan to a lot of these books. And I wanted to read Tarzan, because that one influences so many people. So many artists and authors to this day reference Tarzan as inspiring them, and they love it, and they've read all the books, and it's so great. And I was like, I've seen like the movies, the old movies and the Disney movie. I know none of those are really touching the book, so I'll read the book. I read it, and I'm like, this is interesting. It sounds clean and nice, whatever. Then I realized this was a later production they did, when the publisher in the 1970s saw an uptick of it, and they went back to the estate and said, we want to publish this again, but let's make it cleaner. And I was like, what? So I went and purposely found a copy printed in 1924 or 25 of Tarzan, and read the original, and was blown away by the fact that there's a lot of subject in there that would not pass any censor today in publishing.
Yeah, a lot of Heart of Darkness going on in the.
It's racist.
Yeah.
There's all, stuff in it. I was like, whoa, this is not. I know why they updated. So, but reading, I know you're saying, I can see what you're saying, that it inspires it, but I can't take the way he wrote and adopt it, because I wouldn't be published anymore.
No, it's a lot of these sort of ancient, and we're saying ancient, but Persian and Arabic caliphate that I do a lot of research in, and I do also research in Roman Empire. I'm constantly having internet people explain to me that I talk about 7th century Roman Empire, and they say, well, the Roman Empire fell in the 300s or 400s, and you're an idiot, because it didn't. It didn't fall till 1453. But there's a whole history that nobody. If you ever read the Belisario series from Drake, He basically took the Roman Empire and turned it into a science fiction book. And I do the same thing. Is you have all these cultures there that we don't know about because we're so stuck in, Tolkien, a wonderful writer, was basically writing from a cultural perspective of the Holy Roman Empire, and before that for the Germanic tribes and Charles the Great, Charlemagne. That was sort of the stuff that Tolkien was pulling out, and then everybody copied him, and so we're so used to castles and knights and mismatched armor and arrows and all this other stuff. And because of Mort to Arthur, we're so used to that became the sort of standard cliche, and then you throw some dragons in there, and then that's what everybody does. So one of the things that I try to do is break away from that by going to the Arab, Roman, late Roman, Persian eras. You kind of get away from all of that, and nor do you go to Japan, where we've had samurais forever. But you go to an era that people don't know, so you just rub the serial numbers off enough, and the reader doesn't realize that this alien world you're creating is just a retelling of a. But you can't use their direct stories because their stories are absolutely sometimes. Sinbad does terrible things in the real stories, not the Sinbad we're used to.
Yeah, we sanitize a lot of that.
Yeah,
especially if the book is written so kids can read it. Oh, we're going to sanitize that. But yeah. I mean, I went and read several out of the 1001 Tales. I found that an antique copy of that, and it was fascinating. And that was I learned, and I know you probably know this, but I learned that during a large portion of European history, they would import storytellers.
Yes,
from the Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
And a lot of them were women, but they'd import storytellers to come to the court and tell stories because their stories were so entertaining.
Yeah.
Because a lot of European stories are more parable-ish. They're more like Aesop. They're shorter, or they're a song, they're a poem. Whereas the Arabic, the Ottoman Empire era of storytelling we'd recognize it more today.
Yes,
as a complete plot, story, characters, something that you can sink your teeth into.
Yeah,
and they would literally import people to be the book.
The Chanson de Geste and a couple of the other stories of the era are very two-dimensional, and that's and by the time you get to like Le Mort d'Arthur, we think about a guy writing noble knights and tales, but he was a jailed, failed knight who was talking about the good old days for him, but he'd never been in the good old days. He had been basically a murderer running around with a noble title, and they jail him, and he writes this book called Mort d'Arthur that are all of these tales that he kind of sews together. And he recognized the problem with the early Arthurian tales was that they just they were not good stories in terms of not the way the Arab world was. And it's hard to read, like Piers Plowman is a political drama rather than a good story. A lot of the stories of the era are political dramas, rather than whereas you get into the Arab culture and the Roman culture at the time, and the Persian culture, they absolutely had real stories that were that had middles and endings and beginnings and flawed characters, but the flawed characters were more naturalistic, and of course they're also scientifically advanced. I mean, they had glimmerings of germ theory before it came anywhere near Europe.
Yeah, and it's funny that you look at it, and there's a lot of history behind not just storytelling, but actually writing down and keeping stories in the ancient Near East, which is what we would call Middle East today.
Yeah,
versus what they had in Europe for a long time. It wasn't until like the 17th century that novelization and books became a thing, and when they did, people started getting worried that people were reading too much.
Right. That happened. The Catholic Church famously was worried about people reading the Bible, which we think that's kind of weird nowadays. But they used to have something called a chained Bible because people started stealing Bibles, like in the 1380s. 1380s, people started stealing Bibles, and the big change for Europe was actually when the Roman Empire fell. All those scholars ran over to Europe and started teaching what Europeans weren't really allowed to, and that was, if we think about it, a lot of the idea of storytelling came about from Roman scholars running from the sack of Rome, which the Ottoman Empire, it wasn't the Ottoman Empire, it was the Seljuks, but it would become the Ottoman Empire. They sacked Rome, which Rome at that time was we mistakenly call Byzantine. It was Constantinople is what, but Europe really didn't get this influx of very creative storytelling until the Roman Empire fell, and that's when all of these people showed up, because they, there was a pope who went and got basically the equivalent of a doctorate in science before he became pope. His name was Gerbert. He became Pope Sylvester II, and around 1000 he shows up and becomes pope, and he starts saying the Earth is round, and here's a astrolabe that you can use to measure it, and here is he started all this stuff, and he shocked Europe in 1000, and that's because that had that normally in the Persian Empire. When he dies, they start calling him the Devil Pope, because they call him the Devil Pope because he was talking about all this stuff that you could measure the Earth, and because he heard it, because they were measuring the Earth in the Arab world at that time.
Well, they were measuring the circumference and curvature of the Earth in the ancient Greek and Roman Empire.
Sure, absolutely.
I thoroughly studied Greek and Roman culture I took years of Latin and history and art history, actually. Yeah. And the two things, there's a huge misconception that the ancient world was illiterate.
Right.
Greek and Rome to the Palestine to Egypt, during the time of Roman Empire and before, people could read.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of information. That's, basically the historians mark the fall of the Library of Alexandria as the moment that knowledge took a nosedive.
Yeah, yeah.
And it did. But so that's one of those things I always get a little bit, I'm like shaking my head when people are like, yeah, everybody believed the Earth was flat back then. I'm like, no, actually they didn't, unless they were stupid. And then they did.
Yeah, at the time they used what they called, in Europe they used what called Tolan routes, which I use them in my story. Tolan route basically is a straight line that if you point your ship in this direction, you're going to get to the port you want to get to without having to do any navigation. Mm-hmm. And the result was a very hit and miss. You probably would get to the port unless the winds were wrong, or because the idea of navigating, of what we would think of as navigating, just, in the Roman Empire in the 900s and 1000, they were making accurate maps that we could follow today. Mm-hmm. In Europe, despite the attempts of people like Charlemagne to bring education into their system, and develop an educated, Europe was very much a backwater for a long time. And the Mediterranean and the Arab and Roman and Persian cultures that were very vibrant in the era when the supposedly advanced, it was just, almost, if the Roman Empire hadn't fallen and all those scholars not flooded into Europe, we would have never had a Renaissance. And then Henry the Navigator never would have started running around. And but that's what my book is all about, sort of a sanitized version. It is sanitized in that I don't necessarily want to have, I don't necessarily want to have torture chambers, and there is humorous discussions of torture because one of the Javier ends up in a torture chamber at one point. But it's designed so that, because I really don't want to have another, I don't mind the Game of Thrones. I just don't want to write one. I want, there's only, the Game of Thrones was written. Now we can do something else. It was, mine would be a lot closer to, I had a wonderful mentor when I was younger, a correspondent, not really a mentor in that I hung out with her, was Ursula K. Le Guin. And she wrote these wonderful Earthsea tales, which are just wonderful. but they were capable of being read by an adult and by a young adult because they were very transitionary. You could read them as an adult, but you could also read them as a young adult. So I'm really trying in these stories to create something that can be read by like, for example, it could be turned into a television show if I wanted to. Not that that's like the dream of every writer, it never happens, but the idea is that if you can't tell it on regular television, then for me at least, is that take these wonderful stories and make them more available so you don't have to sweat and grind your teeth. We have enough sweating and grinding our teeth in our society right now.
Yeah, I actually, years and years ago, I met Jackie Chan.
No.
And he said something to me that actually stuck with me for a long time. And that was, he said, I would never play in a movie I would be ashamed for my mother to see.
Yeah.
And I've thought about that. I'm never going to write a book that I'd be ashamed for my mother to read.
Right.
And so that doesn't mean they're all going to be little kid, young adult books,
No.
but it also doesn't mean that kids can't read them.
That's right.
I have to make that distinction a lot when I'm doing my book signings and book sales and stuff at places, and people are like, "Oh, this is young adult, so like 8-year-old." I'm like, anybody can read it.
Yeah.
It's just that don't be afraid of your 8 to 11-year-old to read it.
Yeah.
But I would say more than half of my readership are not that young. So I fully like that idea, because too many people have, I think personally, taken the gauntlet of the rated R and above of Game of Thrones because of how popular it has been,
Right.
and started throwing it around like, oh, if your book doesn't have this much of this in it, that, oh, it's not going to be a good book. I'm like, it's not necessarily a good story is a good story. It doesn't have to be dirty.
Absolutely. And then I consider myself a storyteller more, sometimes an experimental story. I did a series of books called The War of the Ravens, which I'm hoping will someday come back out again. And they got, basically, I published only 150 copies of each one, but each book, I did things, it's part of my biomythology stuff where I take real stories from real life and from my own life a lot of times, but from other people's lives too. And I rub the serial numbers off after interviewing the people and kind of, and then try to create a good story. One of the examples is I was doing research. I have, even though I was thrown out of high school, I have like 1 million degrees now. Schools don't understand autistic people, but when you're just doing it, when you're doing education for yourself, you can, you basically can tell the universities to stick it up their nose and do what you want to do, as long as you learn how to a la carte yourself through their systems. And I was doing research under a wonderful Dr. Marcia Sinnott at University of South Carolina. She's just a wonderful, wonderful scholar, retired now. And she had me running around doing primary source research. And I was digging around one of the libraries called the Caroliniana. And I found a weird set of documents because I basically was looking at World War II. And there was an American Indian, a Sioux national, who used his Bureau of Indian Affairs number rather than a Social Security number. Not everybody had Social Security numbers at that point, and a lot of American Indians used these BIA numbers because that was what they had. And one of the neat things is you can go back in the records and find these. They're a lot easier to look up a BIA number than it is a Social Security number because a lot of that information even today is locked up. So I looked up his BIA number, and this guy was asking to be included in the draft. And his BIA number, I went and looked over, was issued in to a 3-year-old in 1869. And in 1943, he's asking to be allowed to be part of the draft, which made me curious. How could somebody that's 80-something years old think that they're part of the draft? And then I started researching the BIA number, and I kept coming up with these weird little things like his name was Rains-a-Lot. That was his Sioux name, was Rains-a-Lot. The guy who claimed to have killed Custer's brother at Little Bighorn is called Rains on the Face. But many Indians at the time said he's an idiot. He didn't really do it. It was another younger man who did it, who was called Rains-a-Lot. So in 1943, Rains-a-Lot is applying to be a member of the United States military with a BIA number that was issued to a person called Rains-a-Lot also in 1869. Now the answer is it's a whole bunch of coincidences. Scientific answer is nobody lives 84 years and is still 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bunch of coincidences. It's nonsense. But as soon as these coincidences started piling up in the research, I turned them into a character, and I came up with lots of reasons why this character could be jumping around in time and space, and how he really did eat, because Rains-a-Lot supposedly killed Thomas Custer and ate his heart. And he was a young man who did it, but the guy who actually claimed later on got it tagged on him would sometimes say he did, sometimes he said did it, and lots of other Indians said he was full of it, and he became a drunk and he died a lot of years later. His story is very tragic, but I just took all these coincidences and turned it into a character that then got shoved into a book with a whole bunch of other characters that were developed the same way. I started looking for people with histories that were implausible and taking them and putting them into the book and mixing them together into this group. And then I basically took the story of the Wizard of Oz and stuck it behind them, and had all these characters from all, and that's the and then I put my own story, the biomythography, my own story on top of it. And it was totally experimental. Someday I hope to sell it again, but it was also, I got really great reviews from the readings, and I did a lot of weird things, like one of the characters supposedly wrote books. So I wrote books for her and I hid them in libraries, in real libraries. So Harvard has a copy of this book I wrote stuck in its shelves, unless they found it and thrown it away. I would go and I would hide things. I would take places where they would visit. I would take ammo cans and fill them with stuff. And I would dig them in and hide them in farm fields and stuff like that. And I would essentially put the geolocation in the book, so that some days, and I would get a reader occasionally, one of the, I only made 150 books on purpose. And one of them wrote and said, I actually went to where you said it was, and I found your can, and here's the pictures of the contents to prove it. So playing games with audiences I like that. It's kind of fun.
Sounds like it. Now, I'm something here I noticed on your page that, did you go to school also at University of Tennessee?
Yes, I took classes at the University of Tennessee. I was working with a project called Sunsight, and I was working with a project called I was doing a bunch of technology projects as a technology director for Bessie Harvey, Witness and Legacy. I was taking graduate courses at the time at the University of Tennessee. I was also doing research under a man named Ben Bates, passed away now, but I was doing research on the economy of the Civil War with Ben Bates, and writing basically about the misnomers of it. So yes, I was at Tennessee. I just was not a matriculated student.
Okay. I lived right next to it for a lot of years. So when I saw it, I was like, oh, someone who's at least been there.
Yeah, so, I was a teacher for on and off at Pellissippi State Community College for a number of years.
I have several friends who are there who teach in the math department. They're in fact, we're all members of a fraternity, and they teach in the math department there. So yeah, it's interesting. So you taught at Pellissippi State. Which one?
Pellissippi State, the main campus. There was only one campus when I taught there.
Okay.
It was in the 1990s. And I was like, they invited me in to lecture one day, and it's like 90% of things that happen in my life happen by complete happenstance. I got to be a director by accident, literally by sitting in the wrong chair. They invited me in to lecture about the creative industry and technology, mixing creativity and technology. And I was sitting there giving this lecture, and I heard the screaming outside. And a professor basically at that point told them to blank themselves and go blank yourself, and walked out of the building. And this one guy named Ron came, was talking to me, afterwards. He says, God, we just lost a professor. There's no way to replace a professor, after the first week of class. Who's going to take it? And he said, boy, I wish I could hire you. And I says, well, how much are you going to pay me? And so I started teaching. It was my first teaching gig ever. And I didn't even have a bachelor's degree. He didn't know it. I mean, I did get a bachelor's degree, but it was it was before I had a bachelor's degree, and they didn't realize that I was lacking in any form of at that point professional education.
At one point, I was invited to lecture to I can't remember which college actually at this moment, their entire law department students. And I was so excited about that. My very first book had been published, and I just got a request from a university to come and lecture to their entire body of one particular. I was like, this is great, but something up here said, why? And I finally said, why? To them. And they said, oh, well, we want you to talk about your book, Sex Discrimination in the Workplace. And I was like, my what?
I didn't write that book.
Yeah, apparently another guy with my exact same spelling of name, which is not common. My last name with Peyton is not common. My exact same spelling back in the 90s wrote the textbook on that particular subject for law students. And they found me and were trying to invite me to do that because I got a book published. And I was like, that's not going to work.
That's just a lot of people on the internet are adopting, Blue Bacon and Large George, or, weird names because there really is a problem with people covering up each other's names. And, my theory has always been as long as you keep the name consistent, I work with actors all the time. I worked one time with Lady Gaga, who is not Mrs. Gaga, and her mother is not Mrs. Gaga. She's, she adopted the term Lady Gaga. That was her thing. Mm-hmm. She's Minotti, or I can't remember it. I can't remember what her real name is because you don't call her that. Her acting name is her real name, which is the problem with, how many people are named. If your name is Gary Gygax, you can't really use the name in the publishing industry anymore.
Yeah, for me at this point, my name, the way it's spelled, is unique to myself and that one guy. In publishing. So if anybody else comes along publishing, I can go to them and go, what you going to call yourself? Because it's not going to be this. I own that now.
Yeah. There is no other Nelson McKeeby. I even, as far as I know, there's no one in the United States, because I used to work at the Department of Justice and looked it up. If there's a Nelson McKeeby, they were born since 2002. So, which is, and also it's nice. My great uncle is Byron McKeeby, Dr. Byron McKeeby, who is American Gothic, is the guy with the pitchfork.
Nice.
Yeah, the guy with the pitchfork is my great uncle, and I like Iowa culture because sort of the family's part of it.
Cool. So back to the book.
Sure.
This is, as you said, it's the first book in a series.
It's the first book in a series of, there's about 450,000 words written past this first book, in a completely disordered and messy pile. The question that is of interest to the publisher and myself is, how do we take that how do we take all these stories? I already have an outline. I have an outline that goes out, even additional books that haven't been written yet. I have a 1,000,000-page, like I said, a 1,000,000-page encyclopedia of the world. I have, in fact, I've been working on it. You can all see it back here. That's the ship that's in the book. There's lots of detail floating around. So the intention is to keep the book series going, and if the sales keep going this way, then they want another one. So that's going to be. I think that the next one, what I'm doing is I'm taking all this writing and trying to distill it into the next book and the next two books, and so that they're both ready to go. Okay.
Yeah, I've always written personally in the sense of, I know each book beginning and end of section. I know a lot of people who just write and then take it and go, okay, this 100,000 words is going to be a book, and that's not always easy.
No, it's actually very difficult, because one of the things is trying to keep a world I don't want to exactly have to go back and make Han Solo fire second. You know, I need to make sure these characters stay consistent over long periods of time, as consistent as they would any human being, because I do write in a naturalistic style. And I need to have the characters develop over time. And because I'm not writing a superhero book where the character is basically predefined from birth, and then, you know, and then there's no character development through it. The keeping them, because of the fact that I've written some material that would be part of a 6th book if it ever happened, I can go backwards and think about where these characters are going to go to get there. And I'm, and that's part of writing large, is that I have too much material. And how do I turn too much material? Like I have 91 episodes. I call them episodes in my own head, because it's like, you think about the Star Trek Enterprise shows up around a planet, that's an episode, you know, and there's a giant hand grabs it, and then, you know, the giant flatulation monster comes in and eats Spock or whatever. My book has a whole bunch of those episodes, but I have to sew them into a bigger series of storylines that go for, like, the first book is about the captain. I'm not going to give away the captain has a problem. It's part of the book's problem. Most of the readers didn't figure out until the next last chapter what that problem was. Solving that problem, and the issue of coming back to the island where he, you know, had left, and finding his wife basically becoming the queen of the land, is the first book. And then the second book, it's about the queen having sent him away, becomes the queen of the land. Only princess becomes the queen. And the third book is about another problem. And then there's another, but in there's a whole bunch of stories that sort of sew together, that introduce new characters, new problems. It's giant, you know. Have you ever seen a crazy person who goes and puts little cards all over lines and all stuff to prove a conspiracy theory? That's what my writing, I have in the basement, this giant card catalog of conspiracy theory lines, and I'm glad I never let anybody take a picture of it, because otherwise I'm going to get drug away and, you know, and never be let out again.
Oh, I fully understand. Although I learned a long time ago that there are a lot of people, even official people, that if you say, "Oh, I'm an author," somehow that just answers the question, and they're like, "Oh, okay, you're not crazy."
Yeah,
I was doing research for a book, which I wrote, and it's not published. It's been years ago. In this book, the bad guy is using a magic map that basically can destroy parts of America, and I'm destroying landmarks. He's purposely attacking landmarks. One of them was the Arch in St. Louis. And so I'm thinking, this is amazing. That same year, I was going to a convention for our fraternity in St. Louis. So I'm there at the Expansion Memorial Park, and I'm like right there in front of the Arch. I'm looking up going, okay, well, what happened to this thing if it's destroyed? How does that work? Park ranger comes over as I'm just kind of wandering around, and he's like, "Can I help you?" I look at him without even thinking about how it sounds. I'm like, if someone were to like just blow up the bottom of this and it fell over, how far would it hit, and how heavy is it up top? He gave me this long look, and he said, "Why?" I'm like, "Oh, wait, I'm writing a book." And then all of a sudden, "Oh, okay, well, if it got hit right here, it would hit those over there, and that street would be hit there." And he's just giving me the entire map of what would happen and how to destroy this thing.
Yeah.
Like, all I said was, "I'm an author."
That's the famous Steve Jackson incident where the game designer Steve Jackson was doing all these conspiracy theories, and a bunch of FBI agents found it, you know, and in the middle of the conspiracy theories, somebody really did present a way of doing something called phreaking, which is stealing phone services. And it was real, and essentially gave instructions on how to steal phone services. And it wasn't Steve Jackson's fault, but the FBI raided his offices over it. And then that actually turned into a famous case called Steve Jackson Games versus US DOJ. And for a while, I was a trainer at the United States. I taught assistant U.S. attorneys how to be assistant U.S. attorneys as a trainer at the Department of Justice Office of Legal Education. And although I'm not a lawyer, the Steve Jackson Games is taught to this day, but also a lot of these creative, agents get taught how to tell the difference between somebody who's doing research. Somebody who's doing research for a game, what we call a frauditor, or somebody who's doing, because there's this entire thing of these people who pretend to be authors and pretend to be reporters in order to screw with people and be pains in the butt. And they're called frauditors, and they run around, doing horrible things with their camera and claiming it's for the First Amendment. And you got to be able to tell the difference between that person and a real author who really is doing research that could be, kind of sketchy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I stopped him after our conversation. I was like, you do realize you just told me what to do if I was a terrorist. And he's like, yeah, but you don't seem like the terrorist type. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm not. But it made me laugh for a minute there. And I'm like, this guy is just maybe not the best for this, but he
probably should be a ranger.
I did help. I got the notes. I'm planning on writing that book again because I'm updating that series. And the scene is really freaking awesome. And what he told me made it so much better.
Sure.
So more real, but so much better. And so I've got all those notes still. The story behind getting them is one of my favorite because I'm just like, I just used the term I'm an author and got away with everything there.
That's and it's the opposite in when you're working in Los Angeles. Somebody comes by to wait on your table and you're sitting around with a bunch of people. Some of them might be noticeable in that. I mean, I don't hang out with actors, but sometimes there's an actor at a table or a famous musician or somebody. It's not because they know me. I'm basically the guy they hire to do things like research, or they hire. I'm not the guy who what I'm trying to say is I'm not the guy that an actor hangs out with on the weekend. I'm the guy who they hired to tell them how to behave in the 13th century. Mm-hmm. One of the gigs that I've had in the past. And you're sitting at a table and they recognize you, and they don't really recognize you, but they recognize the more famous people around the table. And every single waiter has a script. And they're going to tell you, hey, since you're here at my station, I've got this script I've written, and it's completely original. And it's about a giant monster that goes through Tokyo and destroys it. And it's so original, and you got to read it. And you're kind of going, they don't realize that Hollywood, that I could walk. I mean, there's probably a building in Hollywood where there's 40 million scripts. And, and then when you try to say, you mean like Godzilla? They go, well, Godzilla, except for everybody is vegetarian.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, how many, have you done a lot of Comic-Cons or book signings at events with a lot of genre fans?
I have completely never, I used to help people, I used to arrange to help people to do that. I have never been to a book signing in my life.
I do them all the time. And I have yet to go to a comic convention where I haven't had at least one person per day, come to me to tell me all about their fabulous manuscript. And most of the time, they haven't even written it yet.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I've had a few come to me and hand, this pile of paper to me. Would you like to read them? I'm like, no.
No, you can't. I mean, one of my friends, who I read her stuff and she reads mine online, not our books, is Mercedes Lackey. She's a brilliant writer. And, one time we were talking about this book and she was nervous about for something. I could detect it in her writing. I don't know why I could. We weren't talking in person, we were talking in writing. And I finally said to her, you don't have to worry that I'm going to ask you to read the book. I'm an old hand at this, not from the terms of writing books, but from the terms of working in everybody trying to hand you a script, but also because when I teach writing, a lot of these, I love writing programs. I also think they're absolutely hinky, worthless in some ways. You go to a writing program to become a better writer and have people read it. Only, well, I guess here's one of my circle round and round autistic things. When I teach writing, the best thing I can do is be hyper judgmental, non-judgmental when I read people's writing. And what I mean by that is push them on the character, push them on rewrites, push them on this all other stuff, but not tell them. One of the first things that happened to me in a writing program was I presented a science fiction story to the class. And then I had 30 minutes of criticism, not for the writing, not for the characters, not for the drama, not for the speed, but is science fiction a legitimate form of writing? It's not useful to have that to teach you. But on the other hand, when you're working with these students, and the problem is you're working with a class and you've got all these students, and I've been good at getting people into the publishing industry, even when I wasn't really bothering with it because I was more into television. They would ask me, I was told by this writing program that I would come out and be a top tier writer. And I'm like, even Iowa Writers Workshop doesn't, produces 1,000 writers a year and none of them are top tier. Yes, every generation they have one or two. And that's one of the hard things for writers to realize is that most people will not make a living off of writing.
Yeah. I have, for me, because I do a lot of art and writing and I get a lot of stuff that I do a lot of book cover critiques for people.
Yeah.
And I help a lot of indie authors with their basically the final stages. I don't want to read your manuscript and edit it. I hire people to do that for me. So don't ask me to do it. I need someone else to. But
Right.
You hand me your book and I'll look at the formatting and go, needs work. Or I'll look at the book cover. Right. And I've learned how to be, and this actually helped me. I've learned how to be critical, straightforward, and honest without being cruel. Right. And I've seen people who've been in the business for years, who've done this for years, who the only way they know how to critique stuff is to be very belittling. Right. I'm like, that doesn't help. It destroys their confidence. I don't want to destroy their confidence. I want to sit there and present so they know, oh, this is why I'm saying what I'm saying, how I'm saying, why it should work this way, or my idea. And then I always finish with, and everything I said is an opinion.
Right. And that's one of the reasons why writing circles are good, where you have to exchange writing because they in one of my writing mentees, a publisher said to them, I don't like the fact that your book has a male main character. It doesn't work for me. And they said, I am so angry. I'm going to denounce them for sexism, and I'm going to do this and do that. I don't want a female character. I want a male character. I'm like going. So I finally called up the publisher. And I said, I'm not going to tell you who I've been speaking to, but can you tell me your explanation on why you've been telling authors that you want a female main character? He says, it's easy because we did a psychographic study and we can't sell, there's too many of this type and we want this type. And I was so the only thing the publisher was worried about was selling books. And the only reason they said that about changing the characters, they felt it would be easier to sell the book. Mm-hmm. It didn't have anything to do with art. It had everything to do with selling more books. So I had to go back to the person and say, look, a publisher is willing to buy your book if you make a change in a character. This is, for me, it's a very, I don't think I would push that. I think I would do it if, sure, David Brin can say no, but can you? You've never published before. And it's difficult now that the vast number of books that are being published there's way more books than readers. So we have to be very alert to our art, but also to the sales of our art.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've actually gone past our normal time. It's 9:05 now. So it's been a great show.
Thank you.
Very, very good, very informative. I'm glad for your book. I hope it's very successful.
It's I actually like the book, so it's had good reads so far.
So tell everybody where they can find it.
The book is right now in Amazon under Nelson McKeeby. It's the Tea Trader series. The actual book is the first of the series is On Other Shores, and it's published by Rabbit Fanboy Books.
So it is out there and available. Pick it up. It's gonna be yes, thank you, Amber. Great show. I guess my co-host has changed to Mickey Mouse. I saw that earlier, Brian. Your name has changed. So, well, thank you for being on here tonight, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future when you have more books coming out, or we have other events. We'll invite you back, and you can come and we can chit chat some more. And,
Absolutely, invite me anytime you like.
Have some fun with this. And fortunately, technology did not defeat us. We got on. Computer stuff was really messing us up today, so we're here. Yay! So thank you for being here. And Brian, are you anything else you want to say?
Not really, no. I learned a lot. I enjoy just sitting here listening because, it's easier to do, really.
I was worried I was cutting you out. I was wondering if I should.
No, not at all. Listen, I love just sitting here listening. I really do learn a lot from people. So, yeah, no worries.
All right. Well, then everybody have a happy Thanksgiving next week. Watch out for, yes. Alexi Vandenberg is watching. It's Prince of Cats Literary Productions. That's what's producing your book, my Cupping book. So that's the publishing house. And got lots of stuff coming up from them soon, which is awesome. And so again, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And I hope to see everybody when we are back for our Christmas special, whatever that may be, coming up in December. And then we'll be back to our normal run of events in January. And again, I'm hoping to line up some pretty good authors and coming up, some new names and some returning ones. So thank you, Nelson. Have a good evening and have a good night, everybody.
Bye.